Good morning. So South by Southwest is an amazing opportunity, and we're all trying to figure out how we take advantage of that opportunity. So that's what I'm going to talk about this morning, how we can take advantage of all the great things that are available here and make the most of the time we have. But before I do that, I want to start with a little test to get our minds working. So there's obviously a lot of stuff going on here. It's hard to pay attention to all of it. How can we make sure we're ready to go? And so I'm going to have us practice two tasks, two jobs we're going to have a lot during the conference. So if you guys could put up my slides. Great. Great. OK, first we're going to start with a memory test. And you'd say, OK, why a memory test? Well, let me tell you, you're going to learn a lot while you're here, and it's going to be hard to remember it. One, because there's a lot of stuff, but two, because there's going to be a lot of stuff going on while you're trying to remember it. You may be drinking, you may be listening to music, lots of other things going on. So I want you to practice using your memory for a second. Here are 7 words, and I want you to take a look at these words and practice just for a second memorizing those words. Don't write them down, don't take a picture. I want you to practice memorizing them. OK? I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds, and I want you to practice memorizing the words just for a second, OK? And next, before I give you a memory test, I'm going to ask you something else, because I want to give us a couple minutes for the memory to kick in. I'm going to ask us to do an impression formation. You're going to meet a lot of people here. You're going to form impressions about them. I want you to get used to doing that, OK? So I'm going to tell you about a person. This person's name is Craig, and I'm going to tell you a little about Craig. So Craig spent a great amount of his time in a search of what he liked to call excitement. He's climbed Mount McKinley, shot the Colorado Rapids in a kayak, driven a demolition derby, and piloted a jet-powered boat without knowing much about boats. He's risked injury, even death, a number of times. Now he's in search of new excitement. He was thinking perhaps he would do some skydiving or maybe cross the Atlantic in a sailboat. By the way he acted, one could readily guess that Craig was perfectly aware of his ability to do many things well. Guys, you're hiding my words. I can't, I'm reading off the slides, so could you put those back up so I can see them? I don't have this one memorized. And if you could keep the slides on the downstream monitor, please, so I can read off those. I know what I look like. It's great seeing my photo in the downstream, but the slides would help. Thank you. So other than business engagements, Craig's contacts with people were rather limited. He felt he didn't really need to rely on anyone. Once Craig made up his mind to do something, it was as good as done, no matter how much he might take, how difficult it might be. Only rarely did he change his mind, even when it might as well been better if he had. OK, so if you had to pick one word to describe Craig, what would that word be? Think for a moment about what it would be. What word might come to mind of what way you might describe him? OK? You got that word in mind? Good. Now, scientists actually ran a study just like this. OK? They gave people that exact passage about a person named Craig. It was actually Donald, but I thought if I put up Donald right where we are in the year, all of you would think of Trump. So I wanted to skip that part, so I made it Craig. So apologies if there are any Craigs in the audience. But they asked people what they thought of Craig. And most people described Craig pretty negatively. They said he was reckless. That makes a lot of sense, right? He powered a jet-powered boat. He didn't really know much about it. Conceited a little bit. It was hard to change his opinions. Stubborn, right? Didn't go with anyone else, only stuck to his own ideas. And that makes a lot of sense, right? That fit with the passage about what people said about Craig. But what if instead of those 7 words I gave you to remember, I had given you a list of a different set of words? Different words to remember. Would that have changed how you perceived Craig? Those 7 words I gave you up front to remember, would that have changed how you saw him? Now, most of us sitting there would go, well, no way, right? Why would that change how we saw Craig? I mean, he's the same person. Why would what happened to be going on in the background, a memory test, that had nothing to do with each other, right? One was a memory test, another was an impression formation test. Well, instead of this list, these type of words, when scientists gave people a different list with words like adventurous, words like independent, words like persistent, people saw Craig entirely differently. Same description of Craig, now they saw him as a little bit more, well, adventurous, or persistent, or independent, right? The fact that he was willing to power a jet-powered boat, that wasn't reckless, that was actually sort of adventurous. The fact that he didn't go along with others' point of views, well, that's because he's persistent and independent. Same Craig, same person, different way they saw him. Just because the words people happen to remember at the beginning, the words they happen to be thinking of. And so I think this points out 2 things that I want us to think about this morning. First, influence often happens. We're often subtly influenced by things in our environment, but they're invisible. We don't see what that influence is, right? We often are not aware why we make the decisions we make. And second, first impressions matter a lot. But the background of those impressions, what else is going on, colors how people see us. And so what I'm going to do today is talk a little about both. I'm going to talk about invisible influences, how they shape our behavior, and how we can use that to have a more effective experience while we're here at South by Southwest. So as nicely mentioned, I'm Professor Jonah Berger. I'm a marketing professor at the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. What I'll do today is talk a little bit about my book, Invisible Influence, some of the tips from there, as well as some broader tips to help you have a great South by Southwest experience. One thing before we go forward, though, I know that Hugh already thanked his staff, but they don't get enough attention. So let's give a broad hand for both Hugh and the rest of his staff for putting on this great event. Having attended events like this many times, you sit in the audience, you have a great time, but you often don't realize how much work goes into making it happen. And so really thank the people that you see. Without them, this would not be possible. This wonderful event would not be possible. So let me start out with a picture of me from a few years ago at South by Southwest. And you can tell it's my first South by Southwest. Why? Can you guess why? Because I got a jacket on, right? Why in the world was I wearing a jacket? I didn't know better, right? My first South by Southwest. So I came here a few years ago, really excited. My first book, Contagious, Why Things Catch On, had just come out literally 3 or 4 days before South by Southwest. Was really excited. This is one of the first talks I'd given about the book. We had a small room, about a 60-person room, very small room in one of the wings of the convention center. And I was really nervous before I got there. Why? Because it was one of the first book talks I gave. Wasn't sure anybody would show up. Right? It was a new book. No one really knew of me, and I didn't know if anybody would come. Never been to South by Southwest before. Showed up in the room, and it was packed. Audience, everyone was sitting. There was people standing up. They were packed outside the doors. People were sitting in the hallway. Great talk, and it was a great launch for the book. And I think that's a great example of what South by Southwest can do. Right? Many of you are here because you have a product, you have a service, you have an idea that you want to take off. And particularly if it's in the interactive space, there's no better place to do it. Right? Here is where a lot of these things take off. I think a good analogy, you think about cold and flu. People talk about where's the cold and flu circulate. In kindergartens or planes, right? Why? Because a whole bunch of people come together and then they take that cold or flu back to wherever they are. Right? Our kids all go to kindergarten, they all get sick together, they share the cold and flu, and then they come back to their parents and give them the cold and flu. We all ride planes, we take them back to our community. Same thing here. This is a beehive of attention and interaction for the interactive space. Right? And so things can really ping pong back and forth here and take off with amazing success. And so what I'm going to talk about today is this amazing opportunity and how we get the most of it. Right? There are obviously so many things going on here. As Hugh mentioned, so many concurrent sessions. One of your colleagues said, how do I pick, right? There are 5 things going on. Are they going to be videotaped? How do I figure out where to go? How do I pitch my stuff? How do I make this a success? Right? How do I win using this experience? And in particular, I'm going to give you 11 tips. Some of them from Invisible Influence, some from otherwise, about winning at South by Southwest. In case it's useful, I put a list of the tips up on my website, just jonahberger.com/South by Southwest. You can download it, check it out. Also, the book is actually not out yet. It's coming out soon, but it's not out yet. But since South by Southwest has been so good to me previously, I got the publisher to let me bring 200 advanced readers copies here. So not the full book, it's not even out yet. These are advanced copies, usually go to influentials in the field and media folks, but I'll be signing those 200 copies down by the bookstore after this. So if you pre-order a copy either on my site or Amazon, I'll give you a free copy today with my signature. So let me jump in. So I already talked about one tip, about think about how to make a good first impression. Let's talk about another tip, and this relates to something Hugh said. And I want you to think about picking a goal and writing it down. And this is really important, and I'll explain why. So this is a picture of a marathon. How many of you have run a marathon, by the way? A couple of you. How many have run a half marathon? 5K? How many have run before? Almost everybody. Okay, good. Right, you know what running is. Great. So marathons are amazing. And I think this picture's a little bit inaccurate because these people look pretty happy running a marathon. Usually people don't look very happy running a marathon, right? They look tired. They look worn out. It's a tough experience. And indeed, I ran not a marathon, but a half marathon with my brother a couple years ago. So we thought it would be a great way to bond. The two of us would go running together. He's 5 years younger than I am. This is a picture of him running that marathon race. And there's actually a picture of me running right next to him, if the clicker works. There we go. That's me. And that's the beginning of the race. And by the way, it's funny, I didn't remember I had taken this picture, but you can tell at the beginning of the race, I was having a great time, right? And then they also took some pictures towards the end of the race. This is towards the end of the race. Again, my brother, and by the way, he looks pretty consistent between those pictures. He looks tired and unhappy in the first one, tired and unhappy in the second. And this is me in the second picture. I look a little less happy, a little less buoyant than the first one. And that's right, that's what happens. Running races is hard. 13 miles is hard, 26 is twice as hard. And indeed, researchers looked at what make people successful, faster marathon runners. And they found some obvious things, right? You're younger, you tend to run faster. You train more, you tend to run faster, right? And that makes a lot of sense. But they wondered if there was an easier way to run faster. Could we sort of take advantage of some of the psychology, behavioral science that's out there today and get people to run faster? And so they looked at hundreds of races, they looked at tens of thousands of participants, and they tried to figure out what made some people run faster rather than others. And they found a simple trick that led people to run 7 minutes faster. Now, you might not think, by the way, that 7 minutes faster is a huge deal. Right? You might say, oh, 7 minutes, what's that? It's nothing. 7 minutes is equally, in terms of making you faster, is about the same as rather than training 35 miles a week, training 40 miles a week. Training that much more would make you run 7 minutes faster. So 7 minutes is not trivial, right? In fact, in terms of age, 7 minutes faster is equivalent to being around this age, and instead of being this, being more like that age. Okay, not exactly, but it's about burning 10 years off the clock, right? Being 10 years younger than you would otherwise. What was that secret that made people run 7 minutes faster? Picking a goal and writing it down. They found that marathoners ahead of time, they split the group in half. They asked one group to pick a goal for the marathon and write that goal down. And the second group, they already had goals. Many of them had goals. They didn't just write them down. They found that merely picking a goal and writing that goal down led people to run 7 minutes faster. And you might say, well, why? Right? I mean, if I already had a goal, why would writing it down make me run 7 minutes faster? And there's a simple way to explain it. So training for a marathon is a little bit like planning for South by Southwest, right? You have really good plans. You put together a marathon training schedule. Week 15 will look like this. 75 minutes on one day, 30 to 40 the next, then a tempo walk, then another 30 to 40, then 18 miles on the weekend, and then you rest, right? And indeed, you have the same plan for South by Southwest. You're going to go to this session one day, this session another day, then you're going to go to a party, you're going to see something else along the way. It's going to be a lot of fun. But often our best laid plans don't always work out. Right? We plan for it to look a little bit like what I showed you, and instead it looks quite different. Right? What does week 15 look like? Well, the first day, I'm tired, I'll rest. Right? Instead of doing those 75 minutes. And then the next day, oh, I should run 30 to 40. I'm going to rest again, right? Because I'm still tired. And then, okay, I'll get that 30 to 40 in, but then I end up resting again, right? There's so many things that come up, we don't necessarily stick with our plan. And if we don't write our plan down, it's much harder to stick with it. Whereas if we see that plan written down, it's harder to fudge. We can't say, oh, I didn't mean to train for, I didn't mean to run 18 miles this weekend, because it's right there in front of us. I didn't mean to run that marathon in 3 hours, because it's right there in front of us. Right? If we write that goal down, we're much more likely to stick to it. We're also, by the way, more likely to set ambitious goals. Right? At the end of South by Southwest, how can we make sure we leave here achieving what we want to achieve? If we write it down, we'll write something more ambitious. I want to make sure to meet 3 new people in the industry. I want to make sure to go 5 talks about things I've never seen before. I want to make sure to learn more about interactive media. I want to see more about virtual reality. Whatever it is you're trying to learn, pick a goal, write it down. Right? What are your goals for South by Southwest? Pick them, write them down. You'll be much more likely to achieve them. Okay, so that's point number 1. Now some ones about picking sessions. How do I know which sessions I should go to? How do I know which of the gazillion sessions out there I should pick? And indeed, this is just what one day of the booklet from a couple years ago looked like. Every time I open the booklet, I'm amazed. I'm overwhelmed by the number of choices, which is both great and daunting, right? How do I pick out of all these things which thing I should actually go to? How do I know what to choose? And so usually we use others to guide us, right? We look around, we say, if I walk into a room and it looks pretty empty, maybe it's not very good, right? Maybe I shouldn't go to that talk. Whereas if I go to a room and it's full, standing room only, well, then it's probably pretty good, right? Lots of people are there, it must be good. Notice we do this all the time, right? We use others as a signal of information. It's what scientists would call social proof, right? Trying to find a restaurant to go to in a foreign city, what do we tend to do? We use a time-tested trick. We look around for a restaurant that's full. If it's full, it must be good, right? We use others as a signal of information. And this happens all the time, right? There's a great restaurant in New York called Halal Guys Chicken and Rice. Great place. They serve chicken, they serve rice, pita bread, they have great sauces, hugely popular. Right? The line goes down the block. Sometimes the people have to wait over an hour to eat the food there. And that's not surprising, right? If it's good, people should go there. But should we always follow others, right? Is following others always a good idea? So let me show you a fun example, something I did with the National Geographic show Brain Games a couple years ago, about how following others can sometimes lead us astray.
So we've seen what can happen when we follow the leader, but is there a limit to how far people will go? To find out, we've designed a unique experiment in Las Vegas. We're setting up a sign and hiding our cameras. We're going to see if we can get people to wait in line for no reason at all. Think it'll work? After 15 minutes, nobody got in line. Seems like people would rather follow a trend than set one. So we've asked a conspirator to help us prime the pump a little by starting the line. Would the sight of just one person be enough to get you to join? What do you think other people will do? Will anyone actually get in line?
What's going on?
I was told to come in line, so I'm not sure, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Oh no, she didn't take the bait. As the minutes tick by, people are curious, but cautious. It looks like no one is going to join the line.
up, man?
How about these two?
I don't know what it's for. I think it could be something good, but
The line starts.
yeah, I just saw a sign. Yeah, come on, you'll be second, third people. Get in line.
Will they join the line even though they have no idea what they'd be waiting for? They're in. We've got them. And now that these two joined the line, the floodgates are open. People just can't resist joining in.
What is it?
Looks like it could be something fun.
Is it free?
Yes, it's free.
And the longer the line got, the more others wanted to join. Remember, these people have no idea what they're waiting for.
What's this line for? I think it's an event or something.
All it took was one person, and now we've got a crowd of random strangers.
This phenomenon is known as informational social influence, and it occurs when you rely on others to determine your course of action. You're much more likely to use social influence when the situation is ambiguous, such as in a crisis, or when you're uncertain about what to do.
And as you can see, even without a clear reason for waiting,
There's no description, no nothing.
our line grew and grew and grew. It's time to get this show on the road.
What?
Where to exactly?
Oh, we moving!
Now that the line is moving, we wanted to see if people would follow along even though they had no idea where they were going. We're going to test the science of follow the leader with 3 unexpected obstacles. First, a dizzying maze.
Where are we going?
And even though the path makes no sense, no one is getting out of the line. Do you think these people will realize they're going nowhere fast? Looks like they're in it for good. Now for the next step, we put tape on the ground to see if people will jump over it just because they saw someone else do it. Think they will? Wow, a spinning jump. 3 points for style. Finally, we set up a hopscotch game and had our ringer do it. Will other people follow suit? Would you? All of these adults are playing this kids game because their brains want to follow the leader. So getting each of them to take a lay from an Elvis impersonator is a no-brainer. Now, for the final part of our Pied Piper experiment, do you think we can get them to dance in a conga line? By now, you probably know the answer. Absolutely yes. Remember, all this started with just one man waiting in line for nothing. 5 minutes ago, all these strangers were going about their business, and now they're all dancing together. While it might seem strange, it's actually what scientists would expect.
So we often use other people as a shortcut. We look to their behavior to figure out what the best thing is. Because if they're doing it, it's probably pretty good for us.
Just followed along, started dancing, joining in. It's mental. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
It said the line's here, so we got in the line.
Remember, these people are happy to do all of these ridiculous things for no other reason than because the person in front of them is also doing it.
We was just doing it because everybody else was doing it. When you're young, you're taught to follow the leader. So that was a game we played, so I followed the leader.
Like, what happened?
Where's my brain? Where was my brain?
Stop controlling me. Stop.
Now, we could tell these people they were part of an experiment about why their brain chose to follow the leader, but this is Vegas. Why ruin all the fun?
All right, so you watch a video like this, and, and you say, there's no way I would do that, right? I mean, there's no way we would do the same thing. But we're wrong, right? Just like all these people thought they would never do the same thing, we're wrong, right? We often follow others even when others don't know what they're doing. Going back to New York, that Halal Guy's Chicken and Rice, they actually have another location. It's right across the street. Same food, same company, no one goes there, right? The mere fact that there's a line, people say, oh, it's a line, it must be good. And so the point here is really simple, right? Sometimes we're influenced by others, but make sure we're influenced by the right others. Don't just be a mindless follower, right? Don't just go to a session because it's crowded or because there's a big name. Go to a session because you think it's going to be useful. Go to a session because someone who knows about that industry has recommended it, right? Great way to figure out where to go is ask somebody. Someone's a moderator of a panel or a speaker, seems to know a lot about an area. Ask them 2 or 3 sessions they'd recommend for you to check out. Don't just follow other people mindlessly. Other people can lead us in the right direction, but they can also lead us to do a conga line, right? Maybe when we shouldn't, right? So follow people, but make sure they actually have information. Wayne Gretzky once had a great quote about this. And Wayne Gretzky, famous hockey player, you wouldn't think what he knows about social influence, but he has some great quotes. One of them, which I think is fun, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. I think this is a good one, right? Good motivational one to put up at the office. You got to take a shot to win. But the one I like the most is when asked what made him a great hockey player. He said, you know, most hockey players skate to where the puck is. I skate to where the puck is going. Right? And it's a really simple idea, but I think it's really true. If we're going to follow others, we're only going to get to where the puck is. If we're going to figure out what's going to be the next big thing, one of the reasons many of us are here, we got to figure out where it's going. Don't just go to the place that's the most crowded. Go to the place that seems to have the best chance of getting you where you want to go. Right? Think ahead, not just where we are currently. Okay, next one, and Hugh talked about this a little bit as well, is get out of your comfort zone. And what do I mean by that? I mean go to at least one session on a topic you know literally nothing about. Okay, literally nothing about it. At least one session that you know nothing about. So I go to a lot of academic conferences. I go to one called the Association for Consumer Research. People present wonderful, exciting papers on topics like the relationship between level of involvement and perception of banner ads. As you can tell, these conferences are amazingly exciting and really interesting, all the sessions. Lots of statistics. That's what most of the sessions are about. And then I realized in addition to these type of sessions, there was also a film festival. At a conference full of academics who are statisticians, economists, behavioral scientists, researchers, psychologists, there's also a group of anthropologists who has a film festival, right? With topics like, hey, monstrous organizing the dubstep electronic music scene. So someone who's literally lived in the dubstep electronic scene for a month, shot video about it. Other ones about dog parks and coffee shops, diversity seeking and changing neighborhoods. Completely different than what those main sessions are about. And originally I was like, oh, the film festival, why would I go check that out? Those anthropologists, who knows what they're talking about? And one year I actually went and checked it out, and it was really interesting. It was very different than the way I was usually thinking. Was every film I saw amazing? No, some were good and some were less good. But a lot of them were really interesting, and they caused me to think a little bit differently. And I think that's the real value, right? There's a difference between exploring and exploiting. This is a way scientists talk about the way we think about spaces. So imagine I dropped you off in the middle of Australia with no food, no water. What would you do? You'd have to explore a little bit to find some food and water, right? So you'd look around till you found food and water. But then the question is, if there was enough food and water there, would you stay where you are, continue or exploit where you are, or would you continue exploring? Would you continue looking for new things? And what researchers find is that we tend, once we find the good stuff, to stick where we are. Think about as kids, right? As kids, we're always exploring. In high school, we're exploring. Even in college, we're exploring. Then we start to get in a career track, and we start exploiting where we are. We start pulling the good value of where we are, but we don't keep exploring. And if we don't keep exploring, we don't come up with new ideas. Some really nice research on creativity shows that the best creative ideas come from bringing different things together, right? Not from thinking the same rut we've always thought in, but bringing disparate things together. Think about what it would take to build skis that could hold an elephant, right? Elephant skis don't have anything to do together, but by thinking that way, we come up with more creative ideas. Going to a session you know nothing about will encourage you to think about things differently, explore, not just exploit, and come home with some new creative ways of thinking. This is my favorite example of this. Happened to me just a couple years ago. So there are these brainwave cat ears. I don't know if you guys have seen these. I went to a hackathon. I'm not a CS person. I'm not a coder. But I randomly was walking around the hallway, saw a hackathon, poked my head inside. These, at least, are supposed to be able to read your brainwaves. I'm not sure how much science is behind them, but that's what they're supposed to do. And the ears go up or down, depending on if you're highly engaged or not. A bunch of coders were wearing them. They were nice enough to give me a pair. I heard a little about what they were doing, but it was definitely different than I would usually think, sessions I would usually go to, and I learned a lot about how they're approaching a new topic that's helped me in the way I think about things. So don't just be an exploiter, make sure to be an explorer as well. Okay, next up, keep calm and say no to FOMO. Right, and what do I mean by FOMO? Many of you know what FOMO is, the fear of missing out. In case you don't, here's a definition of it. It's the anxiety that an exciting or interesting event may be currently happening elsewhere, often aroused by posts seen on social media. We've all experienced the fear of missing out, right? I lived in New York for about 6 months a couple years ago. I spent a semester there. New York is the definition of the fear of missing out, right? There's always something going on that you're missing. There's always another gallery opening or another music venue or another restaurant opening that you could be going to. And research finds that the more people spend on social media, the more time they spend, the more they have this fear of missing out, right? And going back to South by Southwest where we are, right? We think about this program, things like this induce the fear of missing out. The notion that there might be a better option somewhere else. And in fact, researchers show that when there are more options to choose between, we end up being less satisfied with the option that we chose. We end up having more regret. Why? Because we're thinking, oh, there might be a better thing out there. right? There might be something better out there that I'm missing. I'm in one session, but maybe there's a different session that's better than I'm in the one I'm in. This is a big problem in the area of dating, right? People say, oh, I'm dating one person, but there might be someone better out there. How do I know? And it causes us not to actually cement the relationship we have already. So what can we do about this? Well, some very nice research shows that Facebook makes people sad and less satisfied. Why? Because very simply, the things that people post on Facebook are not reality. What we post on Facebook are things that make us look good, right? Things that give us social currency, right? If we're women, we stand sideways, we put our hand on our hip, and we cross our legs, right? I've heard that makes us look skinnier. If you want to know, if you're a guy, you want to know what makes you look skinny, that apparently works, right? Why do women look at that in photos? They want to look skinnier, right? Guys puff up their chest to look stronger, right? There's some great examples of this. So I found these online. This is a fun one. So Facebook you, if you're a guitarist, this is what Facebook you looks like, right? You're like in Metallica, you're great, you're amazing. Real you, not as exciting. Right? Because we post the version of us, the photo that makes us look great. Right? Facebook you, oh, look at you, you're pretty cool. You got these sunglasses on, you got your arm up on a hot car. Real you, it's almost the same, except the car's on cinder blocks and it doesn't actually have any tires. Right? And this is my favorite. So Facebook you is Spider-Man. You are Spider-Man. Look at you, you got rippling muscles, you're strong, you're watching over the city, protecting people. That is Facebook you. Right? Real you is a little less exciting. Right? Real you sort of living in your mom's basement. Yeah, you got a lot of spandex on, but you're pretty excited about your costume, right? Here's the problem with the Facebook you. When we look at other people's Facebook you, we think our lives are worse by comparison. We look around, we say, well, look at everybody else. They look like Spider-Man, and I just look like this person, right? And that I must be bad, right? My life isn't as exciting. Social media makes us feel our lives are worse by comparison, and it leads to this fear of missing out. So how can we combat that, right? One way to do it is pick something and stick with it. Don't just go to a session and spend the whole session sitting there looking at your phone, right? Figuring out what other session you should go to. Be there and engage with it. If it's not good, you can leave, but don't be there spending the whole time thinking about doing something else, right? And definitely don't hop on social media and see someone else at another session they're saying is great and assume it's going to be fantastic because it might be just like yours, right? The person's not going to say, oh, this session isn't good because they're there. They want to look like they're doing something really exciting, right? They want to take the selfie with a celebrity to show that it's exciting things going on. Pick something and stick with it. Don't just flit around, right? Pick something and stick with it. Another way to say this is be present, right? Be here. You came all the way to be here, well, be here, right? People traveled from thousands of miles around the world, like dozens, if not hundreds of countries. And yet when we're here, we do the same thing we could do at home sometimes, which is this. We stare at our phones, right? If we're going to be here, be here. Experience all the great things that are here, right? All the amazing stuff going on, right? The art galleries, the pop-up places, Dell's doing something, Intel's doing something else, 3D printing, all the amazing things that are going on. Just walk around the neighborhood and sample the things, right? I loved what Hugh said about throwing away your plan. That's fine too. Walk around and experience it, but be here. Don't be somewhere else, right? Sometimes we all go out to dinner and we're sitting with our friends. We want to have a friends night out and we sit there and we're on our phones. We could do that at home. If you came here, experience what's here, right? And it's particularly important because research shows that spending a lot of time on our phone can actually make us less happy. And there's a couple reasons for that. So one has to do with photos. And this is sort of a funny version of that, right? But we've all taken photos of ourselves that we're planning on uploading, right? And photos themselves are not bad, but here's when photos hurt us. Research shows that when we take photos with the idea of posting them in mind, we actually enjoy the experience less. So we're taking a photo of what we're eating for lunch, right? And we're setting it up all perfectly. We actually enjoy the lunch less. We're taking a photo of an experience. We actually pay less attention to experience. We're so worried about how we're going to look to others once that photo is posted that we don't actually enjoy the thing that's happening. Taking a photo isn't bad, but enjoy the experience. Don't let the photo taking of the experience get in the way of the experience, right? And I thought this was another funny one as well, right? When we're interacting with people, interact with the people. Right? You want to meet people, you want to become an area and you learn more about your industry, interact with the folks that are here. Right? This is the opportunity to do it. And if nothing else makes this point, I thought this was a nice one. Right? Why are they called cell phones? Yeah, I thought that was sort of cute. Yeah, fun things, right? But again, be present. And I'm not saying never be on your phone. Obviously, your phone is a useful tool. It's part of our lives. But it doesn't always make us happy. Sometimes it and social media can make us unhappy. And the more present we are, the more engaged we are with the experiences we're having, the more we're going to get out of this great opportunity. Okay, next I want to switch a little bit to talking about pitching you. Pitching your company, pitching your idea. Many folks are here with that goal in mind, I have a new startup, I want it to be successful. I've heard things take off here. I'm here to help that thing become successful. How can I do that, right? How can I make my things more likely to succeed? So I'll talk about a couple ways to do that. The first is to be a chameleon. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what I mean. So research shows that people imitate others. We tend to do the same things as others. So if someone's touching their face, we're sitting next to them, we're more likely to touch our face, okay? If somebody is walking with their hands behind their back like this, well, other people are more likely to walk with their hands behind their back like this. And in honor of the president who's coming later today, if someone's sitting with their hand on their chin, well, turns out other people are more likely to sit with their hand on their chin. Non-consciously, we mimic, and that's the word people use, behavioral mimicry, mimic the people around us. We do the same things as others are doing. It's called, nicely, the chameleon effect, right? Based on the idea that chameleons change colors to fit with their environment. Right? The idea is depending on what environment they're in, they shift their colors to fit better with their environment. And this goes back to some really nice research on what's called mirror neurons. Right? The idea is it's very basic in the way our neurons fire that we're set up to imitate others. Some scientists did some great research a number of years ago in Parma, Italy. So they were looking at monkeys, and they were looking at how monkeys' brains work. And they had some electrodes attached to a given monkey's brain. And they were interested in how actions fire in the brain. So if you moved the monkey's arm, the actions would fire, go off, bup, bup, bup. In the lab, the monkey moved its mouth, the neurons would go off, bup, bup, bup. In the lab, makes sense. So they went to lunch, and a graduate student came back licking an ice cream cone. Okay, he had an ice cream cone, and the monkey sort of looked longingly at that ice cream cone, as one would do if it was hot in Parma, Italy, and you were a monkey stuck in a cage. You'd look longingly at ice cream cone. But then something interesting happened. The reader went off, burp, burp, like the monkey's brain was firing. But the monkey wasn't moving. The monkey was still. Right? The machine was only supposed to go off when the monkey was moving, yet the monkey was still, and the machine was going off. Okay? So the graduate student took another lick of the ice cream cone. The machine went off again. And it turns out what they found out is even though the monkey wasn't moving, the mere fact it was watching someone else move, those same areas of the brain region that would fire if the monkey was moving, fired when they saw someone else taking an action. So our neurons fire not only when we take an action, but when we see someone else take that action. Our brains are set up to ready us to mimic others. And that's sort of fun, that's interesting, but you might be saying, how can I use this? Well, interesting research. So there's some findings that show that people who mimic others, you're 5 times as likely to reach a negotiation outcome, a positive negotiation outcome, if you mimic your negotiating partner. Right, so you mimic someone, you're in a tough negotiation, hard to win, you mimic that person, you're 5 times more likely to reach a successful negotiation. If you're a waiter or waitress and you mimic a person's order, so someone said, hey, you know, I'd like the Brussels burger with extra cheese and grilled onions, and the waiter says, okay, you'd like the Brussels burger with extra cheese and grilled onions, waiters get 70% higher tips when they mimic the customer. Right? Mimicry makes people like us. If we mimic someone, right, that person likes us more. Research has shown actually mimicry is one reason married couples tend to look similar over time, right? Because they're mimicking each other's facial expressions. Someone smiles, their spouse smiles. Someone's sad, they get sad. And they make expressions, and those set up lines on their faces, leaving traces of that mimicry. And what this all points to, right, is if you want people to like you or like your ideas, be a chameleon. Subtly mimic what they're doing, right? If they're sitting there like this, well, then you can sit there like that. They're touching their chin, touch your chin. Don't do it in an obvious way, but the more you mimic them, the more they'll like you, and the more they'll like your ideas. So that's one way to get them to like your stuff. Another very simply, and I think this is an obvious one, but it's an important one to remind people, don't just talk, listen. Right? Sometimes we're so excited about our stuff, our ideas, that we want to share them with everybody else, but people are going to like us more if we listen. Right? We're really used to talking. We all have great things to share. But it's going to be hard to learn things and hard to get other people to like us if we're just talking, not listening, right? And research shows actually if we're in a group situation and people are going around introducing themselves, we remember some of the people, but we never remember the person before us, introduced themselves before us. Why? Because we're so worried about what we're going to say that we don't pay any attention to what they're saying. And this happens a lot in social interactions. Someone says something, we go, okay, I know what I want to say. And we spend so much time thinking about what we're going to say that we stop listening to them. Don't just talk, listen. Right? That's one of the reasons you're here. Make sure to listen. And in case it helps, here's one tip, which is to talk like a Midwesterner. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'm from the East Coast, and some of you, how many of you are from the East Coast, by the way? Okay, and many of you may be aware that people from cities on the East Coast tend to talk a certain way. They talk really fast, right? They tend not to pause, they tend to interrupt others. That's how we tend to talk on the East Coast. Midwesterners tend to be a little more polite. They talk more slowly. They pause in between someone saying something and someone else saying something. Right? They're more likely to allow space in that interaction. And because of that, right, people tend to like Midwesterners a little bit more. right? They tend to think they're more likely to listen to what they're saying rather than just interrupting. So don't just talk, listen, and if it helps, think like a Midwesterner and talk like a Midwesterner. Another one that I think is actually counterintuitive but simple is ask for advice. So we tend to think that if we ask for advice, people will think we're not very smart. They think we'll say, oh, if you ask for advice, you don't know a lot about the area, right? If you need my advice, you must not know very much. But research actually finds, some research done by a couple of my colleagues at the Harvard Business School, finds that when people ask for advice, other people actually think that they're smarter, that they know more. Why? Because they're willing to ask someone else for help. They know enough about a space to be willing to ask someone else for their advice. And so don't be shy. Don't say, oh, well, if I ask for advice, people won't think I'm very smart. One of the best ways to get someone to like you is to ask them for advice. One, by asking for advice, they'll make them feel special, right? Make them feel different from everybody else, which will make them like you. And also, they'll think you're smarter because you asked them for advice. And by the way, you'll also get some good advice along the way. So there's my advice about asking for advice. Okay, and one of the last couple is around pitching a new idea. And this is really for the startup folks in the audience. How should we pitch our new idea? Not just us, but now how do we pitch our idea? And sometimes we have this tension between pitching it as similar or different. So we say, hey, this thing is really similar to what's out there already, or hey, it's completely different from what's out there already, completely different from anything you ever heard of. So if we're launching a new phone, for example, and it might be sort of a modular type of phone where we can pull out different pieces and plug them back in. So we can pull out batteries and add new batteries. We can replace the screen. We can pull out different pieces of hardware depending on what do we need to use them for. Great new idea, fantastic. Well, should we pitch it as really similar to what's out there already? Is it sort of the next generation smartphone, or really different from what's out there already? It's a modular computing platform, something you've never heard of before. It's completely different. And so one way to think about this, oh, sorry, I'm going to go back. So it's similar or different, right? What do we pitch it as? And sometimes we worry if, well, if we pitch it as too similar, people will say, well, why do I need this new thing, right? But at the same time, if we make it too different, right, if it's something people have never heard of before, they might say, well, I'm not sure I actually want this thing. So how do we make sure to find that right balance of similar or different? And so that's where Goldilocks comes in. So you've probably heard of the story of the Goldilocks and the three bears, right? Goldilocks is in the three bears' house. She finds a big bed, the big bear's bed, it's too big. She finds a small bear's bed, it's too small. She finds a middle bear's bed, it's just right. Remember the Goldilocks three bears, right? Some porridge is too hot, some porridge is too cold, the middle porridge is just right. It turns out that optimal blend of similarity and difference is the right way to go. It's something called optimal distinctiveness. How can we be optimally distinct, right? A little bit similar, but a little bit different. How can we balance the two? Right, when TiVo came out originally, they had this exact problem. So TiVo pitched themselves originally as your own, basically, television station. Your own station. You have a station you can watch what you want when you watch it, whenever you want. And by the way, today that makes a lot of sense. Today we'd say, okay, I get what TiVo does. It sounds really useful. But when TiVo came out, right, over a decade ago, it didn't sound really useful. It sounded sort of strange. It was so different that people couldn't really say, well, what does TiVo do? Do I need this thing? I'm not really sure. It's so different from what's out there already. And so it didn't get the traction that it wanted. So they went back and they said, okay, let's talk about it a different way. We'll have the same stuff, but how can we talk about it in a way that makes it seem less different and a little more similar? So instead they said, okay, we're going to describe it as a digital video recorder. And notice what that did. The product's still the same, the service is the same, but now they took something we know, a video recorder, and they added something to it, a digital video recorder. I don't exactly know what it would be like to have my own television station, but a digital video recorder, I have some sense of what that might be like, right? They took something very different and they made it more similar, right? Made it optimally distinct, made it more palatable, easier for people to understand. And since then, they've been quite successful, right? And so the question is, should we make our innovation a continuous one or a discontinuous one? Continuous being creating, or continuous being continuing an old category, discontinuous being creating a new one, right? And sometimes we all want to be totally different from what's out there before. Nothing is like us, right? We're the only app to ever do this before. But sometimes we make ourselves so different that people say, well, I don't really know if I need this or want this. So we need to figure out how to find the optimal balance of similarity and different. And my favorite example of this is actually the automobile. So when the automobile was first introduced, obviously today everyone's familiar with an automobile, but it was first introduced, it was pretty scary. It was very different than riding around on a horse. Right? Horses got scared, one of these things pulled up next to them at a stoplight of sorts, and the horse would get spooked. People were spooked walking the street. If you lived in a rural area and you saw one of these for the first time, people were like, oh my God, it's the devil's work. It's a moving vehicle. Where's the horse? It must be hidden inside. Right? And so it had trouble getting traction. They had to figure out how to take a very different thing and make it succeed by making it feel more similar. So what could they do? How could they take this different thing, same idea, same automobile, and make it more successful? So they came out with a simple idea called the horsey horseless. And this is sort of funny, but what they ended up doing is taking a fake horse head and putting it on the front of a car. putting it in front of an automobile. And you might laugh at this, but think about what this does, right? Now this pulls up to you. If you're a horse at a stoplight, this thing pulls up to you. It looks a little bit more like a horse, right? It took this thing that was very different and made it a little more similar. Made it feel a little bit more palatable, a little bit easier to understand. By the way, it wasn't a real horse head, it was a fake one, and they held gasoline inside, so it was useful, sort of like a gas tank, shaped like a horse head. But I think the Horsey Horseless is a great example of taking something different and making it feel a little more similar to make it feel more palatable. And so in thinking about this idea, how can we harness the Goldilocks effect? How can we make sure, like Goldilocks, we're similar and different? We're just right. We're right in the middle. We're optimally distinct. Different enough that people understand why they need to go somewhere different from what they've been doing previously, but similar enough to say, okay, this is not so new that I can't understand it. Similar and different at the same time. Okay, and last but not least, last tip here, 11th tip, I'm going to talk about what makes people like something. Why do we like some things rather than others? And to talk about this, I actually want to talk about relationships because I think it's a fun example. So there's a notion out there that for each one of us, there is a soulmate. There is one person in the world who is perfect for us. And this idea started back in Plato's time, actually. So there was this notion that men and women were actually fused together, and the gods separated them, separated someone. And so people were looking forever for their other matched half. When people were cut in half, they were looking for their other half. Somewhere in the world was their other half. They had to find it. And so this notion of a soulmate has persisted for thousands of years, right? This notion that there's just one right person for us out there, right? R&B songs say it all the time. Motivational things, find the one that makes your heart smile. And that all makes sense, right? There's one right person out there for us. But here's something interesting. Think about where people tend to meet the person that they end up marrying. There are millions of people in the world, hundreds of millions, right? You don't get exposed to all of them. So only some of them live in the country that you live in. Some of them the gender that you prefer. But of all those people, you would think that we should marry people we meet in different places. But most people meet someone they marry at work or at school. And again, that's not super surprising. Work or school makes sense. We spend a lot of time at work or school. But how likely is it that the one person that our soulmate is happens to work 3 offices down from us in the building? The one person that our soulmate is happened to take that chemistry class the same time we were taking the chemistry class. So is it really that we met our soulmate, or might something more interesting be going on? So some scientists wanted to look at this. So what they did is they asked people to rate the attractiveness, students, to rate the attractiveness of other students in their class. Okay, so this was a college woman, for example. Students were asked to rate how attractive that they found her at the end of the semester. And obviously, certain people found some people more attractive and others more attractive. And indeed, we all have preferences, right? Some people like blondes, some people like brunettes. It's been suggested that women like men who are tall, dark, and handsome, which I think is fine. But there's good news. Apparently, some women like men that are not so tall, not so dark, and not so handsome, which is good news for folks like me, right? I'm none of the three. So we have different preferences. But what happened in this study? Well, they found something interesting. They found that certain women were liked more than others. But they did something quite unusual. They actually manipulated how many times those women showed up in class. So those women were actors that they were asked to rate at the end of the semester. Some women showed up 0 times to class, some showed up 5, some showed up 10, and some showed up 15 times to class. So all they did was manipulate whether those people showed up to class more frequently or less frequently. And they found that the more people showed up to class, the more attractive other people thought they were. The women who showed up 15 times were thought of as more attractive than 10 times, and 5 times than 0 times. Merely seeing someone more often made people like them more. It's called mere exposure. The more we see something, the more we like it. The more we see a product, the more we hear about an idea, the more we see another person, the more familiar they become, and the more we like them. And so in thinking about how to get our ideas out there, or how to make us be more attractive to others, think about exposure, right? The more people see us, the more they'll like us. So just to wrap up, influence is often invisible, right? Influence is around us all the time. We think we set our own goals. We think we make our decisions by ourselves. We think we pick which restaurants to go to and which sessions to go to ourselves. But we often don't realize that other people have a big impact on what we end up doing, right? We often don't see how influence affects us, even though it does. It has a big impact on what we do. And so in thinking about South by Southwest, how to make the best of your time here, think about how to use others, but use them effectively. Think about how to set those good goals, and think about how to make this experience the best experience you can. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So we've saved time for questions. I think we have some microphones floating around the room. We're also taking some questions from Twitter. So feel free to put your Twitter questions up, as well as head to one of the microphones, and I am happy to take any and all questions. Okay, we've got a question. So from Lauren, what topic that you know nothing about will you be exploring at South by Southwest this year? Interesting. So I find the 3D printing stuff a little bit neat, and I have mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, I think it's a little bit overblown. 3D printing is going to change the world. Everything's going to be 3D printed. At the same time, I think it's an interesting area, so I'm excited to check out some stuff at that. And also thinking about sort of tracking and individual tracking and tracking around things in our lives. People have talked a lot about the Internet of Things. I'm excited to see sort of what's new in that space and how folks are actually using it effectively. There's a lot of attention to it at the Consumer Electronics Show the past couple years, so I'm going to definitely check that out here. But I also think just the art stuff is really interesting. One thing I enjoy is lots of brands try to get attention here, but there's also some art installations and some more creative things going on, and I find that stuff quite interesting, and I always enjoy checking it out. So you may see me at some of that as well. Thank you, Lauren. As a marketing professor, what advice would you give students or new grads to come into South by Southwest to market themselves? Yeah, so I think I go back to a little bit of what I've talked about so far, but we have this tendency to want to talk a lot, and I think it's helpful to start by listening and invite yourself. Sometimes it's hard. You're in a room full of people you don't necessarily know. It's hard to introduce yourself to other folks, but you have to remember is not everybody knows everybody at the beginning anyway. And so being willing to introduce yourself to someone you don't know, being willing to go up and say, hey, I'm Jonah, how are you? What have you enjoyed about South by Southwest? It's tough to do. It's really hard. But once we get over that hump at the beginning, it actually becomes really easy. And so one advice I give you to sort of as a student or a new grad is just try meeting some people. You'll be amazed at the people that you'll meet here. The backgrounds they have, the areas they're working in. I think as Hugh nicely said, you never know what connections that you make today will lead to something else tomorrow. It's really hard to predict how it's going to go. Influence is often invisible. I know it's been in my own life. And so, being willing to introduce yourself to new people, being willing to try new things, being willing to put yourself out there a little bit, I think is always a great way to go. So thank you to Chandler. What made you explore invisible influences? Yeah, so this is a great question. When I was a kid, or I was in high school and college, I used to always put ads up in my dorm room. So I always used to pull things out of like magazines, stick them up on the wall. And I always was wondering, why do we do the things that we do? I think we often see ourselves behaving a certain way, but we often wonder, how did we end up doing what we ended up doing? How did we get in that particular place? So I used to be a soccer coach, for example, and I noticed, I coached a team like sort of U11 boys, and they were great kids, and I always give a motivational speech at halftime to try to fire them up, to get them to want to win. But my speech sort of didn't matter. What ended up mattering, it seemed like, was when we were behind going into halftime, we actually ended up playing harder in the second half. And when we were ahead or tied, we didn't play that hard. And so I sort of wondered why. Why would being behind make us play better? If anything, the fact that we were winning, we should have won the games that we won. What does that mean, right? Why were we winning more likely to win when we were behind? And so it actually made me, I went ahead with a colleague, and we looked at this in NBA basketball. So we collected data on over 45,000 NBA games. We looked at what happened at halftime. And we found that teams that were behind by 1 at halftime were actually more likely to win than teams that were ahead. Even though the teams that were ahead by 2 points, actually, they're +1 versus -1, and they were better teams on average. Being behind motivated people to work harder, which led them to be more likely to win. And so I think these puzzles happen all the time, right? Sometimes we watch ourselves behaving something, we make a certain choice, and we don't always notice why we made that choice. And I think investigating it and digging a little bit deeper is always a fun way to learn more about ourselves and others. There's lots of great puzzles out there. Thank you, Ask a Chef. Okay, John, what can a startup do to make a bigger splash in the world? Yeah, and so I think that's a question that many of you probably have. And I think many of us think that the answer is money, right? If we just had more money, we could make a bigger splash. And I actually think a better question is, how can we generate word of mouth for what we're doing, right? How can we think about getting the people that like us, the small set of people that already know about us and like us, and get them to bring other people in? Research shows that word of mouth is about 10 times effective, as effective as traditional advertising. People are much more likely to trust it. They're much more likely to be persuaded by it. And so what we have to figure out to do is, how can we get our existing customers or our users or the first set of people that like us, how can we turn them into advocates? Right? How can we get them to share our message and build what's going on? And I think that's particularly important in a small community like South by Southwest. Right? What's really nice about here is people are here from all across the world, all across different industries. And so if we can get it to spread within this small group here, they'll take it back to their individual communities, just like kindergartners in the cold, right? And make it more likely to spread across the world. And so I think really thinking about how we can generate that word of mouth. I talk about this a lot in Contagious, sort of the steps behind generating word of mouth. But think about how we can get people talk and share and use that rather than advertising to get our products and ideas to spread. Thank you, John. What is your number one recommendation for effective public speaking? Thank you. Maria, that's a good question. I don't know that I have a number one recommendation. I think if I had one recommendation, it would be to steal. And what I mean by stealing is if you see someone that does something good as a public speaker, does something well, steal it. Do the same thing yourself. You could say borrow. Borrow is a nicer way to say steal. But if you see someone that does something that you like, borrow it, right? Steal it. Take what you saw someone else do and borrow that for yourself. And that's the great thing actually about seeing so many speakers in quick comparison. You'll probably see dozens of people speaking on different issues. You'll see some that do a better job, some do a worse job. And some of that is obviously personal, but some of that is also style. Notice what they do that makes them effective, right? If they do a better job or a worse job, what made certain of their stories or ideas resonate with you? And think about borrowing them, right? So I actually started today, for example, with an example. So I didn't start by saying, hey, I'm Jonah Berger, let me introduce the talk. I actually started with a question for you guys about a memory test, right? And I often do that. I saw someone else do it. I like that idea, using a concrete example at the beginning to open up what's called a curiosity gap, to sort of draw people in, get them excited about what you're going to talk about, and then tell them what you're going to talk about. But I blatantly stole that from another speaker I saw do it. So Maria, I would suggest to steal, at least from speakers, not from stores. Can you suggest tips on influencing others online? Steve, okay, so tips for influencing others online. By the way, if you had to guess, of all word of mouth from 100% all the way down to 0, what would you guess what percent of word of mouth is online? 90? 10%? 90 and 10 are pretty different, by the way. Last time I checked, one is about 9 or 10 times the other. The answer is actually about 7. About 7% of word of mouth is online. And I think it's really important to put that number in context. That doesn't mean that online isn't important, but it's only one of the channels through which word of mouth flows. And we get really excited about social media. It's really easy to get sort of drawn into the technology, but we need to think more about the psychology, right? Both online and off, what drives people to talk and share? Right? Many people are here, see some people on their phones, many people are here talking face to face. We spend most of our time talking face to face. And so really we need to think about what influences others both online as well as offline, right? What's going to cause somebody to do one thing rather than something else? But I think, a great tip is just to be authentic and to understand your customer base, right? To understand who you're trying to influence. At the end of the day, lots of companies, particularly startups in the tech space, end up being really product focused. So end up saying, hey, we got 6 engineers together that used to work at PayPal. They know a lot about payment. We've come up with this new payment processing method. And you'll ask them, okay, well, what need does that solve? And they'll say, well, it's a new payment processing method. I mean, no one's done this before. And they focus a lot on the fact that no one's ever done something before, rather than the fact that someone actually needs that thing. And I think it's much more important to be customer focused rather than product focused. Right? It's really easy to be good at what you're good at and say, well, as long as I'm good at what I'm good at, it'll be successful. But it's much more important to say, what is a need, a customer or client need, and how can I solve for that need at the end of the day, right? How can I make sure I'm delivering value? You think about this a lot. If you look at industries where someone came in and disrupted an industry, people love to talk about disruption, but if you think about how disruption actually happens, take rental cars, for example. So Hertz was huge in the space, and if you asked Hertz what business they're in, they would say, I'm in the rental car business. That's what Hertz does. But if you looked at why Zipcar and others have taken a lot of share from Hertz, it was because Hertz wasn't really in the rental car business. Hertz was in the daily or weekly rental car business. If they were really in the rental car business or the helping people with transportation business, they would have said, okay, what do people need? Well, there's some people that need a car for only an hour. There's some people that need a car for only 2 hours. Let's meet that customer need rather than really focusing what we're good at. Right? Cabs are the same way. So, Uber is now person-to-person ride sharing, but it's also just an app where you can easily find a ride. Why couldn't the taxi companies have put together an app where you could have easily found a ride? Well, they said that's not what we're good at. Right? We're good at driving around in taxis. That's one reason that Uber's come in and done so well. And so rather than just being product-focused, service-focused, what you're good at focused, think about being customer-focused, right? Identify a need and go after that need. And sometimes people talk about the difference between being a vitamin versus being a painkiller. So are you something that people would like? A vitamin, it's a good to have, it's a nice to have? Or are you a painkiller, a need to have? right? When you're sick, by the way, I have a cold. That's why my voice is so terrible, so I apologize. But when you're sick, like I am currently, you need NyQuil, right? It's not a nice to have, it's a need to have. How can you make your product or service not a nice to have, but a need to have, right? A painkiller, not a vitamin. And really doing that well is not just saying, hey, we invented some new technology, but saying, here's a real need, we service that need, and then using that initial community to build word of mouth for what you're trying to do. Thank you, Steve. Maybe one more? Okay, Firefly Travel App. If you could chat with anyone at South by Southwest, who would it be and why? Oh, that's a tough one. God, you know, the thing that's coming to mind is Obama, and I feel like that's an unfair answer, right? Because I feel like that's the easy one that's taken the easy way out. But I think I would love to chat with any entrepreneurs who are really doing something new, right? And not just someone who thinks they're doing something new, but is really doing something amazingly new, right? Everybody's an expert in their area. I know a little bit about behavioral science, but I don't know a lot about what's going on in many technology areas as much as you guys do. And so one reason I come here is to meet people who do very different things from me. And so really anyone, obviously I'd love to meet Obama, but anyone who's doing something exciting in their own area and is really passionate about what they're doing would be someone I would love to chat with. Let me take one last one, and then I'm going to go off stage and cough a bunch and hopefully get rid of my cold. One last question. Survey says, okay, Taryn, how did you find the balance between staying present and sharing South by Southwest happenings on social media as a marketer? Yeah, so it depends. If your job, by the way, as a marketer is to be sharing South by Southwest, then that's sort of the reason you're here. You're almost like a beat reporter. You're not here to be here, you're here to report on what's going on here. And so I think that that's your job, that's fine. But otherwise, you know, think about how to make sure you're spending some time experiencing and sometimes writing what you're experiencing. Maybe take an hour to say, look, this whole hour, I'm not gonna be on social media. I'm putting this hour aside just for me time, enjoying time, and then after that hour, you can write a couple posts, and then you can come back. Right? If your job is to report, then obviously you need to report, but if not, make sure to have some time for actually being here. Okay, thank you guys very much. I appreciate your time. Hope to see you at the book signing. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.